Hello, my name is Colton Presentation, and my research was on the relationship between emotion and fake news within teens. And I initially gained interest into this topic as we are constantly flooded with news every day, whether it be on the internet or on the television. And some of these news and pieces of information can often have dubious intentions, such as fake news. Instead, let me think about, well, how does fake news work and what factors increase the effect and impact that fake news has, which then eventually led me to my question. Now, the introduction. And first, we have to understand, well, what is fake news? And Hunt Alcott, a professor at Stanford, defines fake news as news articles that are intentionally and verifiably false and could mislead readers. And fake news also has harmful consequences as eroding public trust within public institutions, as well as decreasing trust in scientific experts, scientific knowledge, as well as creating social unrest as well. And this has been seen recently within vaccine support, as fake news and misinformation regarding vaccines has decreased public support for vaccines and led to an increase in vulnerability to diseases. And as the internet has risen, information has been oversaturated on the internet. And this makes it much harder to discern the credibility of each individual piece of information. And this leads individuals more exposed to fake news and vulnerable to believing it and then spreading it, which just amplifies this effect and impact of fake news. And in Bakir and McStay's article, Fake News in the Economy of Emotions, they essentially assert that fake news utilizes emotions in order to provoke feelings and generate interest and attention, as well as allowing them to manipulate public mood and opinion. And this situates how important emotion is in influencing how fake news attracts individuals and influence people's opinions to be reliant on agendas and narratives that use false information rather than real world facts. And a gap that I have observed is our research, such as Martel et al., which I'll explain soon, has examined the relationship of fake news and emotions within adults. I cannot find existing studies that examine this relationship within teens. And additionally, studies that have examined susceptibility to fake news within teens have not done it on fake news and emotion specifically, but rather generally. And they also typically only use qualitative methods, such as focus groups as well. And this then leads me to my question, my research question: to what extent is the relationship between fake news and emotion within teens? And I hypothesized that increased emotions would lead to increased belief in teens. Now onto my literature review. And one of my key studies and my anchor studies is Reliance on Emotion Promotes Belief in Fake News by Martel et al., in which they analyzed the role of emotion and one's susceptibility to fake news. And they did this by utilizing a test called PNAS, which essentially analyzed a participant's current emotions at a current moment, and they compared this with how accurately they rated fake and real headlines. And they found that increased emotionality, so how emotional a participant or an individual is at a particular time, is generally associated with an increased belief in fake news. And they also found that relying on emotion over relying on reason also led to an increased belief in fake news. And you can see that here in the top left chart. As the emotion score increases, the accuracy rating of fake headlines also increases as well. And this shows how emotion can lead to more susceptibility and increased susceptibility within adults, allowing them to believe fake news more and for public opinion to be swayed more often. And another study that influenced me greatly was Begal et al. Emotion may predict susceptibility to fake news, but emotion regulation does not seem to help, in which they supported Martel et al.'s finding by finding that increased emotional response to fake news led to increased belief in fake news. And they also found that emotion experienced in both fake and real headlines also increased the likelihood for a participant to want to share the article as well as click on it, which just amplifies the effect that this has. And they also found that political concordance had no effect on this relationship. And political concordance is when an individual views a piece of information or a headline or an article that supports their political beliefs. And the opposite of this is political discordance, in which an participant or an individual views a headline that goes against their political beliefs. And now on to my methods. And I utilize a mixed methods approach in which I use both a survey and a correlational analysis of this survey. And I created my survey using Google Forms, using 16 headlines with headlines being divided into half true and half false, and these were further divided into half Republican leaning, half Democratic leaning. And this was to account for potential biases as well as political concordance that individuals might have when viewing an article that they agree with or disagree with. Additionally, I also use headlines from Montel et al., which gathered real headlines from mainstream outlets such as NPR and fake headlines from Snopes, which is a reliable and reputable fact checker. And for each question, participants were asked the question, how accurate is a claim in the attached headline, with options of definitely false, definitely true, and probably false. And they're also asked if they felt any of the 6 tested emotions, which were anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise, and as well as their intensity. And the participants in question were 77 participants from a private high school within Fort Pierce, Florida, and the survey was distributed via email. And in order to test for correlation, I divided the data into several categories concerning emotion and political concordance. My main category concerning emotion, so I divided participants that felt emotion and no emotion for headlines, and I compared them using the percentage of these participants that rated the fake headlines as accurate. And I additionally did a similar thing with political concordance to see if political concordance affected this relationship. And I also use a Spearman's correlation test in order to find if emotion is positively or negatively correlated with belief in fake news. And this just tests how associated 2 variables are to each other. So in this case, how associated emotion is to belief in fake news. And now on to my results. And when taking the percentage of all participants that rated fake headlines as accurate, participants that felt emotion, 43.56% of them rated the headlines as accurate. And when comparing this to participants that felt no emotion for fake headlines, 31.79% rated them as accurate. And this is around a 10% increase in perceived accuracy for fake news when participants felt emotion. I also performed the Spearman correlation test, which I mentioned previously, and it yielded an R value of around 0.1112 and a p-value of around 0.00003, and this indicates a very small but a statistically significant correlation between emotion and belief in fake news, and this is because the p-value is less than 0.05, which indicates a statistically significant data, as it indicates that it is very likely that this did not occur by random chance, and because the R value is 0.1112, it is very small. As the closer the R value is to 1, the stronger the correlation is. And in the majority of fake headlines, around 60% of participants reported feeling no emotion, and participants that rated fake headlines as accurate were around 19% more likely to report feeling emotion compared to those who rated the fake headlines as true. And when taking party alignment into consideration, on the survey, 59.7% of participants aligned with the Republican Party, 10.4% of participants aligned with the Democratic Party, and 29.9% aligned as being an independent or moderate. And participants that identified as Republican were around 10% more likely to believe politically concordant headlines compared to politically discordant headlines. So, for example, Republicans were more likely to believe a headline that leaned towards Republican views rather than believe a fake headline that had more Democratic-leaning views. And this trend also occurred with participants that identified as Democrats, with being around 23 to 25% more likely to rate the headline was politically concordant. Now into discussion of these findings. And the answer to my question is that within teens, emotion does appear to have a small existing positive relationship with belief in fake news, meaning that increased emotion is associated with a small increase in belief in fake news. And this proves my hypothesis correct, as I hypothesized that increased emotion will lead to increased belief in fake news. However, I did initially assume that it would be much more than I found within my study. And my study also found that political concordance amplified this relationship as well and increased belief in fake news. And when comparing the study to existing literature, my research generally corroborates existing studies, which also find that increased emotion leads to increased belief in fake news within adults. However, a key difference that I did find is I found that political concordance also played a role in increasing this relationship, while other studies that have done this within adults, such as Bego et al., which I mentioned in my literature review, found that political concordance did not play as strong as a role in increasing or influencing this relationship of fake news and emotion. And it's also important to mention the limitations and delimitations of my study, such as the narrow scope of my study, which focused on a very small demographic of a small private school. And this resulted in a demographic that skewed towards more religious as well as Republican, leading to different outcomes in how participants' responses to a particular headline, as well as leading to less generalizable data. And my study also only focuses on a few factors, such as political concordance and emotion related to fake news. And this results in me not accounting for several confounding variables and other variables that are affected and can impact this relationship, such as whether an individual would share it. And additionally, I also lacked advanced statistical techniques, which resulted in me getting less in-depth conclusions about this relationship and about how it really works. And because I only use a correlational analysis, I can only imply that emotion is associated with increased belief in fake news, not necessarily that emotion causes belief in fake news. And now on to my conclusion. And my research establishes that there is a positive relationship between belief in fake news and emotion, with political concordance essentially amplifying this relationship as well. And the most significant stakeholder in this is teens, as my research suggests that teens who have more emotional responses to news, especially politically concordant fake news, are more likely to believe them and more vulnerable to it. And this then results in them having their reality misshapen and damaging their view of issues to be reliant on agendas rather than the facts, as well as decreasing their trust in public institutions as well as public initiatives as well. And this also creates more tension around social issues as they believe in narratives that are false in reality. And my research fills the gap by examining this relationship of fake news and emotion within a new demographic of teens using a quantitative approach, which has not been previously done in existing academic literature. And this study also confirms the positive correlation between fake news and emotion exists in teens as well as finding that political concordance is an influential factor in increasing and amplifying this relationship, as I've said previously. And if I had more time with my research, I would have used multiple schools, which would have resulted in a more diverse and generalizable sample size because it would have been larger. And future research can do a similar thing of using larger and more diverse sample sizes, as I said previously, which result in a more generalizable sample, especially when factoring in political concordance, as you would have hopefully gotten more equal alignment of participants. And future researchers should also take into considerations of other factors, such as whether they would, how likely they are to share or talk about it, as well as click on the article, as this increases the effect and influence that fake news has, and that emotion could also have on fake news. And additionally, future researchers should also take into consideration of maybe using more qualitative methods in terms of emotion and fake news, as it could provide more descriptive data that could show a team's perspective on how they feel like emotion impacts their belief in pieces of information and fake news in general. And this is my bibliography. Now on to oral defense.
Colton, how did the choices you made when designing or implementing your research method impact your research process?
Yeah, so by using a survey allowed me to quickly distribute the questions using a quantitative method, as well as using correlational analysis. I was able to actually find the relationship between emotion and fake news, which actually allowed me to answer my question more accurately.
Colton, how does your new understanding address the gap in scholarly conversation?
Yeah, so my new understanding of increased emotion leading to an increased or being associated with increased belief in fake news addresses a gap, as previous research has only examined this relationship within adults and not within teens. So I found that this relationship exists within a new demographic and group of teens.
Colton, think back to your initial curiosity that sparked your inquiry. What other curiosities do you have, and how has this process prepared you to explore it?
Yeah, so other curiosities I have is generally with marine biology, as that's what I'm going into for college, particularly considering pollution and how that affects organisms within waterways. And this process has helped me to prepare to tackle these curiosities, especially by looking at the existing academic literature and seeing how you can build upon that to find the gap and fill that gap, as well as contributing to the academic conversation by doing that.